Imagine a world without America. No Hollywood, no McDonald's, no Big Macs, no ice cream machine. Guess that one's not so hard to imagine, but still, you can feel the influence wherever you are. To understand what would happen if the United States didn't exist, let's imagine an alternate timeline. We need to go back to the very beginning. In the 1600s, the British started colonizing what is now the United States. But without the United States, there would be no British colonies in North America. Instead, the French, Dutch, and Spanish would have likely continued their own colonization efforts. So in this alternate timeline, North America would look very different. Instead of the United States, we'd have several European colonies competing for land and resources. This would likely lead to more conflicts and wars between these European powers. These conflicts could have huge implications for the rest of the world. For example, the American Revolution inspired the French Revolution, which in turn inspired revolutions all over the world. Without the United States, these revolutions may not have happened, or may have happened differently. In our own timeline though, the United States is often referred to as an indispensable nation. But let's take a moment and think about it. Just how indispensable is the United States today, as we live through the rapidly evolving world of the 2020s? What would happen to the world if the United States were erased from the map? To begin with, there would only be one nuclear superpower left in the world, and that would be Russia. Accordingly, the last foundations of bilateral US-Russia strategic arms control will collapse. It is unlikely that other nuclear powers would be particularly interested in entering negotiations with Moscow on nuclear weapons, as the gap between Russia and the other countries is simply too great. It is even less likely that Moscow will agree to relinquish its unique nuclear advantage over the rest of the world. However, unconditional nuclear superiority does not automatically mean that Moscow would be able to freely dictate its will in global politics. The nuclear arsenals of other countries would continue to be effective deterrence instruments, and a war between the members of the nuclear club would be just as implausible as it is today. That said, nuclear proliferation is likely to significantly aggravate. In the absence of the United States, many of its former allies and partners would think about acquiring nuclear weapons of their own. This primarily implies countries in East Asia like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and the Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. While it is unlikely that nuclear proliferation in East Asia would lead to a sharp escalation of military and political risks, the emergence of new nuclear states in the Middle East would bring dire consequences, both for the region and for the international community as a whole. Would NATO be able to survive in a world without the United States? Theoretically, yes, but only if the European great powers like the United Kingdom, Germany, and France put the maximum political, economic, and military effort into it. The remaining countries will have to increase their defense contributions by more than the 2% on which Washington insists today to some 4 or 5%. Even this, though, would not offset the losses that NATO would incur as a result of the US withdrawal. Without American leadership, NATO would likely turn into a regional military and political instrument of the European Union, and would have a far more modest role in world affairs than it has today. Without the United States, it is unlikely that NATO would continue to pursue its current global ambitions. In a world without the United States, China would almost automatically become the undisputed leader in global technology. Although Europe, Japan, India, and Southeast Asian nations would likely have greater incentive to join forces to challenge China's hegemony in this area. With this in mind, it is hard to say whether it would be possible to create a global technological ecosystem that would be independent of Beijing without the United States. America's absence would send shockwaves through higher education and science markets globally to reverberate for decades to come. The euro would inevitably become the main reserve currency once the dollar exits the global financial system. The Chinese yuan is not entirely convertible, which means that it would be a long time before China could compete with the European Union in the financial sphere. Other global currencies such as the British pound, the Japanese yen, and the Swiss franc could gain in importance. European and Asian financial centers would receive additional powerful incentives for development. And of course, we can't forget about the impact that the United States has had on immigration. Millions of people have come to the United States over the years, and many have stayed and contributed to American society. Without the United States, these immigrants would have gone to different countries, and the demographics of the world would be very different. International financial institutions like the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the International Monetary Fund, where the United States has traditionally played a leading role, would undergo sweeping reforms. As a side note, we shall argue that the United Nations would also suffer a profound institutional crisis, losing both its current headquarters in New York and approximately 22% of its base budget, as well as the US contributions to individual UN departments and programs. The Arctic Council would suffer less, as the American sector of the Arctic is far smaller than that of Russia and Canada. What is more, the United States has not yet ratified the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which somewhat complicates Washington's position in the Arctic Council. The absence of the United States on the world's energy markets could lead to a temporary revival of OPEC and a strengthening of Russia's positions. However, the green and shale revolutions will continue unabated. Washington's departure from the global arms and foodstuff markets would also result in a significant restructuring of these markets. Even with the joint efforts of the remaining countries, the gap left by the United States in the arms market would be extremely difficult to fill. With Hollywood no longer the center of the global film industry, the cities that used to hold that position, primarily Paris and Rome, would have the chance to revive their former cinematic glory. However, European filmmakers would face tough competition on the global entertainment market from filmmakers of Indian and Chinese origin. The disappearance of New York from world fashion would give a second wind to Paris and Milan, while the United Kingdom would probably become the center of musical life for a long time to come. Quite naturally, the world would not end. It would survive the departure of the United States just like it survived the extinction of the dinosaurs and woolly mammoths. It would be difficult and extremely uncomfortable at first. The withdrawal of the United States would lead to a number of crises and conflicts, and a long period of instability and uncertainty, as the struggle for the American legacy would be long and tense. Somehow, we would still get through it. At the same time, I guess the world would miss the United States. We would miss the American optimism, the American energy, and the American drive. We would miss the high-rise buildings of Manhattan, the narrow streets of the French Quarter in New Orleans, and the expansive prairies of the Great Plains. We would miss the country music and the Chicago-style steaks. We would also miss Halloween, Thanksgiving, and perhaps Independence Day. Just like the entire world would miss Russia, Argentina, Ethiopia, and New Zealand. Every single country is unique and indispensable in its own way. In this sense, the United States truly is an indispensable nation. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe.